I appreciate everybody coming this morning. I was beginning to worry about 15, 20 minutes ago. This place was pretty empty, but I'm delighted that we've got people here. My name is Kathy Sneed. I'm with Service Members Opportunity Colleges, which is located in Washington, D.C. I've been the director now for about 7 years, worked for the organization about 17, which for me is a long time. I know many people in Georgia retire with 30 years, military, 25, 30 years. But as a military spouse, we moved from place to place and relocated lots of times. So I have lots of college and university experience, just in different locations. A couple of our hardship tours. Anybody else have a hardship tour while they were in the military? Ours were in the Pacific, Hawaii, and Alaska. So we had both extremes, but both were wonderful experiences, as you might guess. And certainly from an education standpoint, very different academic challenges at both of those locations. Today, what this session is really going to focus and talk about is Service Members Opportunity Colleges. We'll talk a little bit about membership in the consortium, but also in the other programs that we have. The Degree Network System, SOC Ad, NAV, MAR, COAST, and then also CONAP, one of our outreach programs. But before I get started talking about SOC, want to get people working together and get a little stimulation going this morning. I know it's hard first thing in the morning as you're getting into sessions. So a question I want to pose to the group is, what makes a university or an institution military-centered? Would ask you to work in groups and just do a quick 3-minute, what are the elements, what are the requirements or characteristics of a military or a veteran-friendly or veteran-centered institution? So rather than making people move too much, just work with the group you have around. I've got a timer, and we'll report out in just a few minutes. All right, so how are the groups doing? At least a couple of characteristics to define the term. For me, the term military-friendly is often overused, and I think as what we'll discover as we do kind of this reporting out is that it means one thing to one group, one thing to another, and there isn't necessarily some common definitions. But if you would, with your groups, just call out at least one or two characteristics that you identified that makes an institution military-centered. Yes, ma'am?
Having a registrar who's a vet.
Registrar who's a vet, okay?
We're very lucky in that. And also having someone in financial aid that knows how the GI Bill works and the post-9/11. Very important.
So knowledgeable people on campus who have worn those shoes, worn those boots, if you would, and really can relate to the military student or veteran. What else?
Creative outreach program.
Creative outreach, all right. Yes, ma'am.
Recognizing military training or experiences as college-level learning.
Okay. So recognizing that prior learning, valuing it in terms of the degree to be able to award that credit. Great. Others? I haven't heard anything from over here.
You said the same couple of things, that point of contact and recognizing credit. Campus-wide recognition of military. Some faculty and other staff know they're there.
Sure.
And a Veterans Resource Center.
Veterans Resource Center. One of the campuses up in New Jersey that has done something that turned out very effective, and it's just as you're talking about, a faculty mentor program. They went through the faculty and staff and identified everybody who was prior military. And in each department, they identified a faculty member or a person who was military. So when new veterans and military students come in, they identify, and they also sometimes give their rank so that they'll know that they were enlisted, as well as the officer ranks, and gives them a point of contact in their department. And they really try to work that angle. So it is important for that military culture a lot of times, and it's also the appreciation for their service. Other ideas that we haven't covered yet?
Having policies and procedures
Okay, military friendly. Last thing, service members, from my experience, service members have been used to lines, structured procedures, and the last thing they want to do is to be told to stand in another line, wait your turn 30, 40 minutes, or come back in 2 days, we're too busy. The answer to them is there are other institutions that I might look at that point, absolutely. Anything else we haven't really touched on? All right. Well, as you can see, the term does mean very, very different things to individuals. And I think the bottom line, what we talk about at Service Members Opportunity Colleges, is really that commitment to do the right thing for the service member. A lot of colleges and universities, if you don't have the program that they're seeking, direct them to another institution, and to be able to, again, in the Universities of Georgia system, to be able to direct them to the right institution and the right fit for them. They're using their precious tuition assistance or their VA educational benefits. When those run out, they may not have additional funding. So that's one of those. I'm always very, very careful, because when you look at some of the list, Military Advanced Education has a list of the top 100. They may or may not be the right fit for those institutions, for those service members or for those individuals. And it really comes down to what the individual service member is looking for. Some may be ready to hang up the uniform and not be identified as a veteran or a military student. Others really want that veteran center experience, student lounge. One of the veteran panels we had, which I thought was a young soldier. He was 24, he'd gotten out of the military, and on the panel we were asking what they were looking for in a college experience. And he was very, very quiet, and he said, well, probably shouldn't be telling you all this, but he said, I want the co-ed experience. He said, while I was walking security, sentry duty, I dreamed about my classmates from high school who are on college campuses, and I want a regular college experience. So for him, it was being at a campus where there were females, and he was ready for the full experience of college. And so we were happy to be able to afford him those opportunities. What I'm going to do again is talk a little bit about SOC, Service Members Opportunity Colleges, and really the principles and the criteria that our organization have developed and colleges and universities have adopted are really what I would call the starting point of being military friendly. When we talk about the academic policies, the flexibility in some of those policies, that's the starting point. And then how colleges and universities tailor that to their unique student population is really up to the individual institution. We try not to dictate as much as possible a lot of policies, criteria, because individual campuses and individual systems already do that. But a little bit about the organization. SOC was founded in 1972, shortly after the Vietnam War ended, and one of the concerns at that point was how to make, it's much like today, how to make that transition with the military student population into civilian life and also post-secondary education. At the time, a number of barriers that prevented service members from enrolling immediately in college. So SOC was created. It's a Department of Defense contract, so it's funded by Department of Defense. And we work with all of the services, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine, Coast Guard, in the operation and provision of the services. Everyone participates. It is a membership opportunity, and right now we have more than 1,960 colleges and universities across the country that participate as SOC Consortium members. The good thing about the membership application and process is there's no dues, there's no fee required by an institution. What we ask of the institution is commitment to military students and to serve them well. This is, in addition to being an eye chart, is the group of higher education organizations that we work with. There are 15 higher education associations that participate on our advisory board. So we're working with student affairs administrators, with NASPA, ACPA. We also work with HACU, the Hispanic Association, and as you go down the list. So all the policies and the guidelines that we establish, we vet them with those higher education organizations. And as I mentioned, the Department of Defense, both the active and reserve component of all the military services also participate on that advisory board. The board meets about twice a year, lively discussions and working on issues and policies, and we'll talk a little bit about some of those. The red packet that you have, just to give you an idea, there is a list of SOC Consortium colleges and universities by state, so you can look at Georgia and identify the colleges and universities in the state. That'll just give you a quick thumbnail sketch. The purpose of the organization, our mission, is really to help coordinate higher education opportunities for service members. I often describe it much like my past, where I felt like I was a split personality. We have one foot in the higher education community and one foot in the military community. And as you won't be any surprise to you, oftentimes those two communities are not speaking the same language. And we are a lot of times that person in between. A good example, if we go back to the post 9/11 GI Bill initial implementation, Veteran Affairs, educational benefit side of the house had about 10 higher education organizations help write that policy and the guidance. For weeks, we talked about tuition and fees. And then when the implementation came out and you saw the chart, this is on the initial post 9/11 GI Bill, where it was like a Chinese menu. You take the highest tuition in the state as one category, and the highest fees in one, you add them together, and that's your maximum. And the higher education folks around the table went, but that's not how higher education works. Each institution has the tuition and fees. If you're trying to come up with what the maximum would be for the state, it's at one institution, the two sums. So there we were in the same room, thinking we're talking the same language, but we hadn't gotten far enough into the weeds to really talk about how that policy might come about. And subsequently, that has changed as far as the rates for military, for veterans, educational benefits at the state level. So part of what our job is to help translate and to have that conversation so that policies and initiatives that get created are applicable and appropriate for both of those communities. And the other thing we do is really advocate for the flexibility that's needed to help access for the military student and also the availability. I know we talk a lot about access, and it's important for our service members to feel that they're college capable. So that's one of the other goals. As we look at the broad SOC organization, the 1,900 colleges and universities are in that one of those first boxes called the SOC Consortium. We'll talk about the consortium and the expectations for those groups. That was the first part of the organization that was created in the 70s. And then in mid-80s, some of the military services said, you know, the consortium and the standards there, the principles and the criteria are great, but for the active duty mobile service member, we would like you to do additional things. And that's where the SOC degree network system came about. The Army was really the first one, SOC Add, SOC Army degrees, the Navy, the Marine Corps, and the Coast Guard have followed. The other program that we have is CONAP, which is a concurrent admission program, and we'll talk a little bit about that. That's one of those outreach programs, and I know you're talking about creative outreach, and that's one of the options that we'll talk a little bit about. To be a SOC consortium, yes?
Did the Air Force choose not to have you all pursue that, or why did the Air Force not join it?
The Air Force participates in the SOC Consortium, but in the degree network system, they opted not to because they have the Community College of the Air Force. Community College of the Air Force was created in the 70s, right about the same time, for the associate level. So Community College of the Air Force takes that vocational technical training that airmen get and applies that with general education for an Associate of Applied Sciences. So you are correct. They opted not to participate. At the bachelor's level, they do use the civilian institutions, and they have a program called, everybody has acronyms, AUABC. So Air University Associate to Baccalaureate Cooperative. Don't you love, just when you think you've got the higher education acronyms down, you add the military acronyms together and you get a completely different language or alphabet soup. Other questions? No. Just to very quickly, we'll cover the initial conditions for SOC membership. I think most of the institutions here in the room are already SOC Consortium members. Yes, sir. Sure.
It's interesting to me that SOC is owned by the Department of Defense, or started by the Department of Defense. And they would say that one SOC, Department of Defense, look at SOC, and SOC, and SOC, SOC goes together with everything.
Right.
One transcript, one Department of Defense standard.
That would be nice, wouldn't it? And we often have had those discussions about the arts and the smart transcripts. And we've also talked about it, those of you who work with the Air Force and the Army as far as their portals, their registration portals. And all the service chiefs agree that it would be ideal to have one system. And the caveat is always, as long as it's mine. I have actually heard that from both Air Force and Army to say, we support that effort. But they haven't gotten to that point, and I think that may be certainly coming in terms of the transcripts as we look at the military evaluated transcripts, that might very well come about. So again, all of the services do participate in the SOC Consortium. We work very well, and we work closely with the Air Force headquarters, their education service chief in that area, because they go to all the institutions, similar institutions as any other service member do. And as we'll talk about, the other services, the AD, NAV, MAR, and COAST, the services pay additional funding for those programs, so it's not fully a Department of Defense from that standpoint. Criteria, we ask that colleges and universities be degree-granting institutions, either regionally or nationally accredited. And again, we use the CHIA database of programs to make sure, along with the Department of Education's list of higher education institutions. Institutions need to be approved for educational benefits, so we work with the state approving agencies to make sure that they have been approved for educational benefits, and they meet some of the Department of Defense instructions on voluntary education. The last one is that colleges and universities not exhibit a student loan, an excessive student loan default rate. So when we look at a SOC, a college application for membership, we are looking at all of those factors. So we'll go to the Department of Education student loan default list, we'll look at the rates, we work with state approving agency, we work with, again, the higher education accrediting bodies to make sure that that accreditation is up to date. Every 2 years, colleges and universities are asked to update their college information. What we find is a lot of their personnel have changed in a 2-year period of time, but it's also to remind them of these commitments. And we, again, are checking at that 2-year point, are they still in good standing with their Higher Education Accrediting Association, student loan default rate, and some of the other issues. If for any reason they don't meet those standards, then we do contact them and they are pulled from the SOC Consortium membership. And more than anything else, it is just to remind them of the commitment. When we do that annual update well, it's not an annual update, a biannual update every 2 years, then we're asking the college and university senior leadership to make that commitment. It's a pain, but we ask the president or one of the senior leaders to actually sign on again and reaffirm their commitment to the military student. For SOC membership, there are 3 general principles. We want the service member to share the same academic experience, same educational experience as their civilian counterparts. So we ask that colleges and universities not make a different degree requirements for military students, don't change the requirements, don't try to customize or specialize it either to make it easier for a service member, because again, at the end of the day, the service members are going to be competing for jobs with the civilian counterparts, and we want them to have a quality education. I already mentioned about being appropriately accredited. So again, regionally or nationally accredited. If it's a specialized accreditation as well, we'll look at that. And I think the third general principle that is squishy at best is that we ask colleges and universities to be flexible in terms of academic residency, the scheduling, course transfer, and as you know, that acceptance of non-traditional credit. Over the past 20 years, where we've really seen a lot of flexibility has been in the scheduling and the course modules that colleges and universities have developed. 16 weeks semester certainly is out there, 8-week courses. Some institutions have monthly start dates so that that service member who may be on TDY couldn't start 1 month, but they can start another month. But the higher education community, again, continues to look from an accrediting standpoint at the quality of those experiences. And certainly from the 70s, the acceptance of transfer credit from other colleges and universities has certainly changed. Much more flexibility now in accepting the transfer credit. There are 4 criterion that colleges and universities also agree to accept. And that's where, again, sometimes the flexibility comes in, but it's also that interpretation of how you interpret it. The first criterion is that colleges and universities be reasonable with the transfer of credit. Do you have to accept everything in transfer? No. But we ask that it be reasonable and that you take a look at their previous coursework. When I worked at Texas A&M, Central Texas, one of the experiences I had is a line of students waiting to register, and people actually bragging about how many credit hours they had, but that they're still a sophomore or they're still a junior. So you had people saying, well, I have 215 semester hours of credit. They're looking at their military as well as their transfer. But I only have 60 that apply to this degree. And so that's really where we're trying to look to avoid any duplication, or where you possibly can accept those previously earned credits. There was a question or a hand up over here.
I was just going to ask, do you ask them to make exceptions to the general rules that most schools have a minimum numbers you must take at that institution?
Perfect lead into the next one, which is the academic residency piece, and I'll come back to that. One of the other things that we talk about with the transfer of credit is, as you know, colleges and universities have different titles and different numbering systems. For many of our service members, some of the biggest challenges sometimes are English composition and math requirements. Not that they're not good in those things, but they'll take a course, English Composition 101, and the institution that they next transfer in says, oh, but you didn't have ALA style, you didn't write a 20-page paper, so no, we won't accept that course. The student then takes English composition for a second or a third time to be able to do that. And that's where, again, we ask for that flexibility with colleges and universities. At that point, if they've taken a course, perhaps you could give them a challenge exam for your English composition course to see if they truly can pass that final exam, or look at one of the CLEP or DSSTs that might, again, be able to show that they have the competencies for that course. For me, if I'd had to take college algebra more than one time, that would have been a real deterrent. I was doing well to get out the first time. And for many of our students, that is a hurdle as well. College algebra with geometry, or college algebra with intro to calculus. And so those little nuances, when a college can say, you have those competencies, we'll accept this course, and again, have them demonstrate that. Going back to the question about the academic residency, SOC Consortium schools agree to 25% maximum residency at the institution. So the other way around that is 75% of the coursework may be transferred in from other colleges and universities or from prior learning assessment, whether it's military credit, testing programs along those lines. The other requirement or stipulation there, and I heard the group yesterday talking about it when you were talking about exceptions to policies for military students, is also no final year or final semester requirement. Why is that important to a mobile service member? They don't know how long they're going to be with you. Our assignments were 2 to 3 years. If we started a degree program, when is the move, the permanent change of duty station going to happen? At the end. So by allowing them to complete that residency at any point along the way, that helps them to complete the degree. For many institutions, one of the ways that they work around that, they may have an academic residency requirement that's higher than the 25%. But they have a waiver for military students. And so again, just as you might have an exception to policy, they would waive that requirement for the military student and or spouse in that case. It's perfectly acceptable to ask for a copy of the orders if your policy was higher. So again, you can validate that this is a service member and you're allowing that 25% academic residency. As we talked about earlier when you all were identifying what makes a military-friendly institution, the acceptance of credit awards for military training and experience. With the SOC Consortium, the requirement is only that you recognize and award credit for military training courses. So the service school, whether it's basic training, any of their professional leadership development courses, A schools if you're in the Navy, C schools, which are all of those. But we ask that you recognize and award them as appropriate. One of the challenges we recognize is sometimes recruiters, in their efforts to convince people to join the military, say you're going to get all of this college credit for your military training and experience. So when they finally come to your campus, they've seen their arts transcript with 60 semester hours of credit, and they're a junior. And what do you have to tell them? Not so fast, absolutely. And that is a frustration. So again, we try to communicate to service members as well that yes, those are college level experiences, but they may not all apply to a degree that you're working with. One of the other services that SOC has is a helpline or a hotline for military students and veterans. So they can call in and talk to one of our academic counselors, work with the issues. And when I first started with SOC, I had an individual who called and he said, I've got a complaint against my school. And he said, they need to be kicked out. So as always, and I know you do the same thing, you listen, you let them vent. And he said, I have a degree from Central Texas College, and I've now moved to another school. I'm getting a bachelor's degree, and they won't accept all of the credits that I got at Central Texas College. So we started that academic discussion of, so what was your degree in at Central Texas College? Auto mechanics. I have an associate's degree in auto mechanics. Moved to the state of Alabama, going to Troy University, and I said, and what's your bachelor's degree going to be in? History with a teaching certification. So you all who are in the academic community know exactly what the requirements. A history degree, you're going to have at least 35, 40 semester hours of credit in history. When you add that teacher certification onto that, you're going to have another 30 hours of education courses, student teaching, your general education. So that auto mechanics or auto maintenance is going to be very few courses. But this student was hot. He knew his institution was doing him wrong. So that's a big piece of it as we work with service members, many first-generation students, is to really help them understand that process, that if you're going to be a history teacher, you need the background knowledge, the subject matter expertise in history, and you also need the knowledge of classroom management and the curriculum development along those lines. So again, from SOC's standpoint, we'll work those issues, but it is left really to the institution's autonomy to look at your academic programs and what you can and can't accept related to their military training and experience along those lines. The fourth and final requirement for SOC Consortium membership is that you recognize and award credit for at least one nationally recognized testing program. So college CLEP, DSSTs, the Dante subject exams, Excelsior College examinations, and many also accept AP. But again, for the college student, the CLEP, DSST. For the active duty service member, those tests are free of charge for the first time. So again, colleges and universities can certainly encourage them to take those CLEP tests while they're on active duty as well. It's a way to continue to make that academic progress. We certainly see that a lot for students who are deployed or mobilized in Iraq and Afghanistan. They can take the CLEP study guide with them. They can take the materials, a textbook, and study independently. And one of the education services officers or the testing officer actually travels through those camps and will provide the testing. We've got a great picture. I should put it in the slides. You've got people standing guard, and you have 5 or 6 students standing outside on rocks taking their test, on the side of a vehicle, on the hood, to be able to take the test. So the conditions may not be ideal, but again, they're making progress toward that academic goal. So those are the 4 criteria that all SOC Consortium members agree to. As I mentioned before, we have 1,960 member institutions, and also in that packet, you have a CD that has the handbooks listed on it. Every 2 years, we provide that publication that has a college information page for each of those academic institutions. The handbooks and the CDs are provided to all the military installations around the world. So for service members who go in, whether it's in Europe, whether it's in Asia, or continental United States, they have the opportunity to look at those resources, to identify a college in their home state, and then also to look at the CD or the or the SOC guide to be able to find out information about your policies and requirements. Each institution, each SOC Consortium institution, also provides us 3 points of contact. We have an institutional representative, a SOC counselor, and a VA administrator or certifying official. I would encourage you all to look at that. This is a sample of what a page would look like in the guide, and across the middle there you see 3 points of contact. Sometimes at workshops we'll open the book and someone will look at their institution and you'll hear this, the gasp is their name is listed as the SOC counselor and no one at their institution bothered to tell them. You've been there, right? So I do encourage you to take a look at that. We try to communicate with those 3 points of contact several times a year, but it's really difficult when you look at the turnover we have in admissions and in financial aid and the registrar's office. It's constantly changing, and so you'll find points of contact there. I'm going to talk a little bit about the responsibilities. How many of you in here are institutional reps, or that you know you're an institutional rep for your institution? All right. So you get communications from us from a number of times. That point of contact, the institutional rep, is really working with the compliance issues, making sure their college and university is up to date on information about SOC, is able to provide their senior leadership with issues that might be affecting education of service members. Just a couple of weeks ago, the Department of Defense, Veteran Affairs, and Education hosted some webinars talking about the executive order and the principles of excellence. So the institutional reps are our go-to people there where we send you information about the webinar. You are also that disseminating point to pass it on to others at your institution to make them knowledgeable about it. Chief advocate for service members' education, and as we talked about, if we have some troubleshooting cases or some issues, compliance issues, where a student feels that their college may or may not be helping them to the extent possible, we're going to go to that institutional representative to talk about the issue and to actually do some research. I talked with a couple of people at lunch, I think it was yesterday, about the Paul Harvey syndrome. We don't try not to get too excited about student complaints because we know there's always another side of the story. You know, when they're telling their story, they feel that that's the only view that they have. So we take that information, but we work with the college or university to also find out the rest of the story. You know, if we get financial issues, they've gone to collection because they haven't passed a course, nobody told them that they would be recouped for that amount of money. So we'll work with the service in that case and the college and identify where there may have been an error or where there was miscommunication. 9 times out of 10, it's miscommunication. The information was there. They may have been provided in writing, but they didn't read it or they weren't availed of the information. And sometimes it's exactly the opposite. The student's version is absolutely correct. And so we work with the college or university on those issues. One example of that was when a student had been working with the school, was moving out of the area, wanted to complete the degree, and so he worked with his advisor, and his advisor gave him the name of the school and the 4 courses he needed to complete for that degree. Student goes off, takes those 4 courses, and then applies for graduation. Graduation file is denied because the school was a nationally accredited school, not a regionally accredited school. Fortunately, in that case, student had the email communication, had the documentation, and we went to bat for that student to say he did everything you told him to in order to graduate. Completed the coursework, passed them grades, and his career as a firefighter is dependent on the degree, completing that associate's degree. So again, takes it to the level of the provost. In this case, he took it to the level of the president, but the president honored that commitment and said, you're absolutely right. The student did what he or she needed to do, and we'll award that degree. So I put that out there. So if you have cases that you need help with a student, we're happy to work with that. Second position we have are SOC counselors. How many of you are listed as SOC counselors? The SOC counselor doesn't have to know everything about the university, but needs to know who to contact at the institution. So typically we find those individuals are in the admissions office, maybe in the registrar's office, and again, they know about the SOC principles and the criteria. They know generally about the transfer policies, the admission policies at the institution, and they're the referral point to actually get the specific question that someone may have. We have email addresses as well as phone, and I think most of the time email is the way service members are communicating with the college. One of the newest positions that we've added is the Veteran Program Administrator or School Certifying Official. Veterans have lots of questions about funding, the GI Bill, making sure that their benefits are going to take place, trying to get an idea of the resources that might be available on campus to help them. So this point of contact is really, again, to help veterans with their questions, their comfort level of coming to campus, and trying to work with them about all the educational programs there. Do we have any veteran program administrators on that list? All right, several of you. Thank you for doing that. A little bit about the demographics, just to give you an idea. Roughly 80% of the SOC Consortium institutions are regionally accredited, 21% nationally accredited. By far, public schools, public colleges and universities, more than half, 55%. And then you see private institutions, nonprofit, 23%, and for-profit, 22%. That for-profit group has really increased in the last probably 5 years. And again, I think we all recognize that there is, veterans have, and service members have government funding to pay for their education, and so colleges and universities in the for-profit sector are certainly taking advantage of that and working, really marketing for with those students. When we look at 2-year, 4-year breakouts, about 60% are 4-year institutions. They may award associate and bachelor's degrees, and then you have the 2-year, which are only awarding certificates, diplomas, and associate degrees. Questions? I saw, I think, another hand. Yes?
Just wondered if sometimes you have a combination of duties in one person?
Absolutely. Sometimes it'll be the SOC counselor and the VA, the veteran program individual, or you might have the institutional rep and the SOC counselor. I would encourage institutions to have at least more than one, because if that person is out for any reason, then your military students may not have a point of contact to be able to reach at that point. All right, any other questions about the SOC Consortium? We're going to move into the degree network system and talk a little bit about the admission and the application process there. No? Okay. Well, as I said, in the 80s, it was actually Army service chief, voluntary education service chief at that point said, you know, the SOC principles and criteria are great, but they're not specific enough. They're not really helping the mobile service member, at that point the soldier, as they move from place to place. Can you do something more with transferability? You know, and as you recall, with the SOC Consortium, we just ask institutions to be reasonable with transfer of credit. So with SOC Add, we created a course articulation system. It's a guaranteed two-way transferability. Anybody who works in the registrar's office knows that course articulation is tricky, painful in some cases, and really gets to the heart of courses. You're looking at course content, you're looking at the rigor, and you're also looking at the level of that information. But we've created a degree network system, covers the Army, Navy, Marine Corps, and Coast Guard. Started out with Army. As the Army service chief likes to say, you know, the Army took the lead and then the Navy followed along. The Marine Corps Vol Ed service chief says, yes, and then the Marine Corps joined and we made it better. You know, they added a few tweaks. And the Coast Guard says we follow along as need be on a shoestring budget. So we have about 160 colleges that participate in the degree network system. We have course categories. I'm not going to go into a lot of the detail, but course categories that really take those courses. Intro to Criminal Justice at one campus, may be Administration of Justice at another institution, or all different titles, course numbers. And so the academic staff look at those courses and look at course comparability in terms of the content and map that. It's not just that we do that mapping, but it's a peer review process. So those schools that have a criminal justice program look at one another's courses in criminal justice, and they have to agree to the courses that they will accept. So Armstrong Atlantic may be looking at Columbus State's course and looking at colleges and universities on the other side of the country to be able to say, is this course comparable? So with the course articulation, we have more than 8,500 courses that have guaranteed transferability. So for the service member who's at Fort Benning working on a degree with a college or university, whether it's Columbus State or whether it's one of the other schools, when they move to Camp Casey, Korea, when they move to Fort Lewis, Washington, there are courses that they can take at those institutions out there that are guaranteed to transfer back. They would be a transient student, but they don't have to ask specific permission from Columbus State of which course to take. We've already provided that articulation for them. So that's the articulations. There are about 500 degree programs at the 2-year level and 460 at the 4-year level. So those are fully developed degree programs with course articulations in them. And then the other piece that's different than the consortium is the SOC Degree Network System, SOC Degree Network System schools issue a student agreement. And that student agreement has every requirement for the degree. And it's often called a contract for a degree because the college or university signs that these are the graduation requirements. We won't change them as long as you're working toward that degree and communicating. Person leaves active duty service, that student agreement is still in effect. So even though they've left the service, they can continue with that student agreement. We also get the other question of, I've already left military service, I've just learned about SOC NAV, can I get a student agreement as a veteran? And the answer there is no. The school will probably still work with them, it's just that they're not going to provide that student agreement and that guaranteed transferability. A little bit about the degree network system too is it is by service invitation. Yes, ma'am, question?
Yeah, just wanted to know, you said that as long as they're working on the program, is there any length of time that expires?
The question was, is there any length of time that expires? And when you look at the college information page for the school will identify that length of time. Most will say 10 years. Some will say no limit, which I think is putting it out there because you never know when that student may come back to say, I'm ready to graduate. Other schools will put 5 years along that. But again, the institution can make that decision of what the length of time is. And I know there are also exceptions. If somebody gets close to that 10-year mark, then they can go to the college and university and say, could you extend for a year? I'm down to my last 3 courses. Can you help me with an extension? And so we know that. But that's a great question there. The other piece, as I was just about to say, is it is by invitation of the military service. So those of you, when we talk about the degree network system, it tends to be those colleges or universities that are near a military installation, whether it's Fort Hood, Fort Stewart, Fort Benning, whether it's down at Jacksonville, up here at Beaufort Marine Corps Air Station, Parris Island, Coast Guard down in Charleston, wherever they might be. So the education services officer at that installation looks at the installation's educational needs. One of the Department of Defense instructions is that you would not duplicate degree programs on a particular installation. So we'll use Fort Stewart as an example. If an institution's providing services at the 2-year level in criminal justice, general studies, automotive maintenance, and accounting or business, then other institutions would not be invited in the degree network system to cover that location. They also have distance learning providers as well. Same thing at the bachelor's level. But every 3 years, the installation conducts a learning assessment of the installation. So it's really an educational needs assessment of what new programs service members and their family members are interested in. And it's based on that information that they may have need of new degree programs to cover a particular area. Yes, sir.
That agreement to where, or that requirement where you don't duplicate degree granting institutions on the base, is that a rock solid requirement? Because there are some regions that allow that and others like Fort Stewart don't. And it's not, in my opinion, it's not in the best interest of the student to say you can only get it from one institution.
Right.
And that's the one we pick. Why don't we offer a range of, criminal justice from Armstrong or from Savannah State or
Sure.
from somebody else, along with Embry-Riddle,
Right.
Virginia College, or whatever? Why do we limit it to just
Right.
one institution?
And I think the limitation goes back to resources, both on the base as far as having enough space for classes and areas. Pam King is probably the best person to be able to talk about that at Fort Stewart. But as to my extent, it is that broadly across all the services, they're trying not to duplicate on a particular installation. With distance learning, it becomes extremely difficult because it's not that you can't take courses or you can't enroll at other institutions. It's just that on the base, on that installation, they're not providing those opportunities. You may have 8, 10 institutions serving that base with courses, but they try not to duplicate the particular program. As you look at it, for those of you who are looking to expand with the military population, many will provide satellite locations outside the military base to be able to provide those programs and those services, and certainly to attend education fairs and other events on the installation. The Colleges and universities in the degree network system tend to be in the geographic area of the military installation. And again, it is by service invitation. So as we work with a school, a college should first have that conversation with the military installation that they hope to serve, and to get an indication on the application that that's going to be supported by that vol ed service chief and the education services officer on the base. Just a quick side-by-side comparison. The schools in the broad consortium serve a wide diversity of students. They may be active duty, they may be the reserve component, National Guard, located anywhere in the state. The residency we've talked about, and that's really the same for both the degree network system and the SOC Consortium. The two pieces that are different, or two elements that are different, is with the ACE Guide credit recommendations. For SOC degree network system schools, they must recognize and award credit not only for the military service schools or the military training, but also for your MOSs, your occupational specialties, and your military ratings. So it's that experiential learning on the job as well as the formal training courses. I've talked a little bit about the guaranteed two-way transferability, so that's the added feature there, and also the student agreement, that formal evaluation of prior learning, usually when a student has completed 6 semester hours of coursework with an institution. So it's an upfront evaluation so that the student knows what credit for their prior learning will be accepted. Questions, other questions about the degree network system? Then I'll move on to CONAP, the Concurrent Admission Program, and how it works. This is probably one of those underutilized programs that we have. It's an outreach program that is Army specific, and it's the Army Recruiting Command who actually funds and sponsors this program. But Army recruiters are aware of the program, and those that really use it well, when they are working with a young recruit trying to enlist them into the Army, they talk about concurrent admission to college or university. If the student is interested, they complete, it's an application, but it's a letter of intent, if you would, that says, I plan to pursue a degree at XYZ institution when I complete my military obligation. So whether they have a 3-year, 4-year, 5-year military obligation, they've been linked to that school, and the school has their email address and contact information. The school that uses the program wisely is making contact every 6 months, every quarter, with that military student, sending them the catalog, newsletters, paper, whatever you want to provide them, but also messages about how they could start working on their degree with you before they leave military service. So if you have online courses, they don't need to wait for their military enlistment to be completed. They could use their tuition assistance for courses with you while they're on active duty. They could take CLEP tests, they could do other things to help advance their progress. By creating that relationship while they're on active duty, it's more likely that that student or that service member, when he leaves the Army, is then going to come back to your institution and enroll. So that's the way that program works. And really, it's up to the college. Some colleges send 1 or 2, once a year, send some kind of information. Those with more sophisticated systems say 6 months before the person is leaving the military and transitioning, starts to do a little bit more outreach with them. We're ready. Here's the application. Here's the application deadline. The student does have to be accepted to the program, so whatever admission standards a college or university has, they still are expected to meet those requirements along those ways. The evaluated credit. Yes, ma'am?
You're indicating that their intent to enroll, but you said they could also encourage them to get started with the courses.
Right.
So that means they actually would enroll while they're still in.
That's correct. And so they would complete that application and be a student. Absolutely. And again, they can use their military tuition assistance to pay for those courses. So again, the thrifty person, that's a great option for them because they have money for college. They'll also have their VA educational benefits if they're in for more than 36 months to be able to do that as well. Okay. So that's a little bit about the CONAP program, and as I said, it's really underutilized. Typically, it's someone in the admissions office who is that CONAP point of contact, and the person that does that outreach. But as we've said, it also depends on the recruiting battalion of how much they use it and how likely they are to get results with it along those lines. A couple of other resources that I'll tell you about. The pocket guide, which you have in the red folder, just talks a little bit about college outreach with military students. I think most of you are certainly aware that that executive order talks about aggressive marketing. That's one of the primary concerns that legislators have these days, is being concerned that our veterans are not taken advantage of. So upfront information, full disclosure of fees, requirements, obligations, and again, a little bit on the marketing side as far as what's acceptable on a military installation or base, and as far as commercial solicitation. The Military Student Bill of Rights is also in that package. I think it's on the left-hand side. And again, we created that about 4 years ago, the Military Student Bill of Rights, to let students know that they did have some basic rights for information and access to colleges and universities. And if you look at that and you look at the executive order, the principles of excellence, they don't align perfectly, but they're very, very similar. And one of the things that we've been working with at the White House is to offer to let the White House use our Military Student Bill of Rights. If they want to modify it and tailor it, that's a good starting point. And so we'll be having those conversations next week with their policy folks. The other product or project that we've been working with is a national campus survey. From Soldier to Student is a report that was conducted in 2008, really to find out what colleges and universities provide in the way of services and programs for their veteran students. You can download a copy of From Soldier to Student from the ACE website, and next month we will be sharing the findings of the replicated survey. In the fall of 2011, the 4 organizations, ACE, ASCU, NASPA, and NAVPA, the National Association of Veteran Program Administrators, collaborated again and conducted National Campus Survey. So the results of that will be out middle of July. Probably no surprise, many, many more colleges and universities are providing services and programs for veterans on their campuses. So share a little bit about the structure, how they're providing those services, who their chief or primary point of contact is for veteran programming, and where it fits into strategic plan in colleges and universities. For some of you who are trying to get your colleges and universities to do more with your veteran student or your military student population, this might be a good publication to be able to provide some documentation. 60% of colleges and universities who responded are doing this. 80% award credit for military training and experience. So they're looking at the MOS as well. So I'm always encourage people to use the resources you have when you need them. And if you need documentation, we're happy to work with you and provide that. Those of you who are going to the DoD Worldwide in Las Vegas in July 23rd, there'll be a panel there sharing those results of that workshop. The other thing we do is spend a lot of time on what I would call burning issues and voluntary education, some of those high priority programs and initiatives. Certainly the aggressive marketing has been one of those. Affordability on campuses as far as tuition assistance. The other program that we conduct is working on burning issues on metrics and outcome measures. And again, at the DoD worldwide, SOC will be hosting an event with 4 different technology systems, Banner, DataTel, PeopleSoft, I've forgotten what the 4th one is. But they'll have representatives from those data systems or information systems to talk about collecting data on military students and veterans. And it's really that conversation of what's available currently and what colleges and universities would like to see from a customization standpoint, trying to keep the cost down, but having that conversation. Certainly looking at retention measures and the promising practices about how to retain military students. And the last slide is really just how to reach us or make contact with us. We have the general email, we have an 800 number, fax, and I really do encourage you. We have a staff of about 30 we have a staff of 30 that work all aspects of military and veteran education. If you just want to talk, if you have a question, there's no such thing for us as a dumb question. We're happy to answer and work with all of them. If you're working to develop a program or you want to know more about how CONAP works, we have a project director who works with CONAP, and he'd be happy to schedule outreach visits to a state or a location to be able to talk about that. All right, other questions? You all have been great on questions so far. Yes, sir?
The yellow packet here, could you just describe how that came to pass?
In the packet on the right-hand side, there's a yellow list of veteran programs and services, and that's really a work in progress. It's a collection of what other colleges and universities provide for their campuses. We have it on our website, and you can search by topic on the one that you download. So if you're looking at scholarships and you just want information of what other colleges and universities provide, if you're looking for wounded warriors, what do colleges and universities do there? But it is a collection as we travel and work with colleges and universities. They share their promising practices. Great point, thanks for bringing that up, because if you have a promising practice you would like us to list on that sheet, we would be more than happy to add that. We like to get that point of contact and also a web address so that we can make sure that we can keep it current and linked. But that's a great way if you're starting a program and trying to get some new ideas to look at what other people are doing.